So I've made a few videos on the lore of Dark Souls, and those videos cover what I believe are deliberate metaphors that Miyazaki put in his titles. For example, in Dark Souls I believe that fire represents civilization, and I believe that the painted world in Dark Souls 3's DLC represents Dark Souls as a series. You don't need to go back and see those videos if you haven't. I'm going to cover the important bits here in a moment. But the problem with those videos is that they're not actually talking about the theme, the main point of these games. They're talking about metaphorical interpretations of the story, metaphors that I truly believe were deliberate, but they're not the theme. They hint at the theme, they allude to the theme, they can help you understand the theme, but they themselves are not the point of the story. And so that's what this video is going to be about. What I think is the point of the story. The point of all of the stories. Not just Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, but all of the games directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki. I believe that they all share thematic elements, and that all of their stories are reiterating the same theme over and over in different ways. So, let's get started. What is the point of Dark Souls? The point is that everything rots. That things, by their nature, decay over time, and eventually must come to an end. But it's also that people really don't like that. That humans want to preserve the things that are precious to them. And that they'll go to great lengths and make great sacrifices to achieve that. But that despite those efforts, they are doomed to failure. Because the very mechanisms that you use to preserve something past its expiration date will cause it to become corrupt and lose the qualities that made it worth preserving in the first place. Let us re-examine the stories of some of the FromSoft games now that we have this new framing in mind. Let's start with Sekiro, because Sekiro is the one that's most different to the other Souls games. In Sekiro you have Isshin Ashina, a terrifying, legendary figure. Isshin led a successful rebellion against the Central Forces, and took control of Ashina. And so this country owes its existence and its prosperity to Isshin Ashina's accomplishments and his strength. All of his item descriptions tell you how much of an absolute monster this guy was. But by the time of the events in the game, Isshin Ashina is old and sick and dying. The Interior Ministry is a military arm of the Central Forces. They are the people that Isshin initially fought back. Having been defeated by Isshin long ago, they are understandably afraid of him. But news of his advanced age and illness has given them the balls to attack Ashina once again. And that is the situation that Genichiro finds himself in. He is the current leader of Ashina. Its safety and preservation are his responsibilities. And he knows that Ashina is not what it used to be. He knows that the country does not currently possess the strength that it used to, and they don't have the ability to fight off these foreign invaders.
We managed to drive them back once, but the Interior Ministry's army is far too powerful. Look at this mountain of bodies. Ashina cannot be defended by normal means. Not anymore.
Genichiro is a true patriot. He loves Ashina. And he fears that the end is upon them. To protect his country and avoid the looming fate, he pursues strength. And he doesn't care from where it comes from.
Heresy, you say? If it is for the sake of preserving Ashina, I will seize any manner of heretical strength. I will endure any burden.
Genichiro's body is a testament to his dedication. His body is covered in wounds. His arms are heavily burned, presumably from using the lightning of Tomoe. Genichiro is obsessed with protecting Ashina, and he doesn't care what it costs him.
This land is everything to me. For her sake, I will shed humanity itself.
The irony here is what I talked about earlier. In attempting to preserve things unnaturally, we often corrupt the very thing we are trying to protect. And as a result, it loses the qualities that made it worth protecting in the first place. Genichiro gains his partial immortality from the Divine Sediment, which is a concentrated dose of the rejuvenating waters that he got from Dojin. Dojin is a surgeon who performs inhuman experiments on the prisoners in the abandoned dungeon, presumably under orders from Genichiro, as they both seem to share a similar goal.
Ah, fret not, dear shinobi. I will perform my duty for the glory of Ashina.
In Sekiro, as well as in all other Souls games, the concept of immortality and preservation are associated with corruption, pestilence, and stagnation. The rejuvenating waters can make you resilient, but it also makes you lose your humanity. And Ashina today is filled with immortal horrors of one kind or another. Even the dragon's heritage that Genichiro seeks is not without problems. It is revealed that dying when you possess the dragon's heritage is what causes the dragon rot. The more you die, the more it spreads. It's almost as if you're draining the vitality of the land and its people to sustain your own. Even if Genichiro got everything he wanted, he acquired the immortality gained through the dragon's heritage, and even gave it to his soldiers and his army. Even then his plan would fail, because the repeated deaths of all his soldiers would cause the dragon rot to spread, and Ashina would become a pestilent, plague-ridden land. At the end of the game, when you face Genichiro for the last time, Ishin Ashina has finally died. The Interior Ministry has launched their attack, and it is not going well for the Ashina samurai. At this very moment, Genichiro's country is being burned to the ground. At this point, Genichiro, in his search for all manner of power to help him, has managed to find a second mortal blade, one with the power to open a gate to the underworld. And he uses this to literally bring back the glory of the past, to make Ashina great again. Genichiro sacrifices himself to revive Ishin Ashina in his prime. Symbolically, what Genichiro is trying to do is to revive the past, to revive Ashina as it was. And that is the point of Sekiro. It's a story about preservation and immortality. It's a story about the costs you pay in its pursuit. And what's true for Sekiro is true for Dark Souls. Now that I've framed the story in this way, you might be noticing a lot of parallels between Sekiro and Dark Souls. And we'll talk about that soon. Maybe we'll talk about it last. But first, I need to talk about the Ashes of Ariandel DLC for Dark Souls 3. The following is from an interview with Miyazaki. He's talking about that DLC before it was released. I quote, "What we're trying to do is approaching the big theme from the main games from a different perspective. With a different perspective, I mean that we've been using the painted world as a different perspective in order to describe the main game's theme symbolically." End quote. Basically what he's saying is that they used the Painted World DLC to symbolically reiterate the point that the main games were making. And they do that by contrasting one with the other. So we can use the story inside the Painted World to better understand the story outside the Painted World. Now, if you've seen the previous video that I made on this subject, you'll know that I think that the Painted World is a metaphor for the Dark Souls series. The rot represents Dark Souls becoming stale and uninteresting. It's the game's lore and accumulated history. Friede and Father Ariandel are the decision to cling to Dark Souls because it's their home, even though they know it's rotting. Fire is the decision to put the series at an end before it becomes a shadow of its former self. And the painter herself represents Miyazaki, and his desire to start a new painting on a blank canvas, unrelated to Dark Souls. I know, you're skeptical, but just give me a moment to argue my case. Let's examine the story of the DLC. The story of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC is that the painting is rotting, and everyone in the painting knows that it's rotting. There is a painter in this painted world. In Dark Souls, when you make a painting, you're making a world. And she's not making it just to make it. She's making it with the intention that people will inhabit this painted world.
I will finish the painting of a cold, dark, and very gentle place, so that it might make a home for someone someday.
The paintings are video games. They are crafted worlds, made for the sake of their future inhabitants. Now the current painted world is rotting, and so to prevent this world from tainting the creation of the next one, the decision was made to burn it away.
When the world rots, we set it afire for the sake of the next world. It's the one thing we do right, unlike those fools on the outside.
Now remember what Miyazaki said. He said that the painted world is meant to describe the theme from the main game symbolically from a different perspective. which makes what this Corvian just said very important. The fools on the outside that he's talking about are the people outside the painting, the people obsessed with the preservation of the first flame. And you can hear the disgust in his voice when he describes them. He really doesn't want to be like those fools on the outside. And so the story of the inside of the painting and the outside of the painting are two parallel stories that contrast each other. The people on the outside continuously choose to preserve past the expiration date, whereas the people on the inside chose to die at the right time. Fride, however, convinced Father Ariandel to choose rot over fire. The thing is that she knows that the painting is rotting, but has made the decision that even rotted as it is, the painted world should be preserved.
Be forewarned, eager Ash. Should this world wither and rot, even then would Ariandel remain our home.
After Fride is defeated, and the painting set on fire, it is revealed that fire is just one of two ingredients needed to make the new painting. The other is the blood of the Dark Soul. The painter needed to see fire to understand it and for it to serve as her inspiration. And the blood of the Dark Soul is the very pigment for the new painting. The painter is taking the most important elements of this world and using them as the material to craft the next. Together, all of this is meant to show that although this is indeed the end of Dark Souls, its essence will survive. What is dying is only the rot born out of the series' lore and accumulated history. But its best elements, its fire, and its dark soul, will live on in a new form. The following is a quote by Miyazaki. "I'm not sure about other publishers or developers, but at least From Software believe that all things that we have learned in the past titles can be best reflected in future titles only by working on new franchises and new series." End quote. The DLC is a metaphor for the series as a whole. It's a metaphor for Dark Souls itself. But like I said before, metaphors aren't themes. The theme of the DLC is the same theme of the base game. It's about the desperation to cling to things, and those things' inevitable end. Which brings me at last to Dark Souls itself. I made a video about Dark Souls' story, and now that I think about it, I do recommend that you go and watch that. Because I cover some interesting things on there that I don't cover here. Basically, in that video, I argue that the first flame is a metaphor for civilization, and that the dark is a metaphor for human instincts, or humanity before the advent of the first flame. The gods are like Ishin-Ashina. They are the founders of this initial civilization, and that the linking of the fire is a kind of ritual. It's a means by which the Lords of Cinder can inherit the will of the First Lord, and preserve the existing order, prolonging the inevitable end. Now, like we did with Sekiro and the DLC, we're going to go through the story step by step. But first we need to talk about Elden Ring. There are 2 recent interviews with Miyazaki in which he says some interesting things that I'd like you to keep in mind as we're going through the story of Dark Souls. In the first one, he's talking about the demigods. I quote, "From the boss designs that we've revealed so far, the one that I feel is a good match for how we take the heroic concept and twist and misshape it due to the power of the Elden Ring shards is Godric the Grafted. He is an excellent example of this because he encompasses that feeling of sadness and frustration when a lord comes to the end of his reign, trying to cling desperately to the power he still has left." End quote. In the second interview, he's talking about the Erd Tree, and I think you'll find what he says here particularly interesting if you went back and saw that video I was talking about earlier that I made. I quote, "What can represent these rules and order, but also not be absolute? That was the question that ran through my mind when I created this image, and the tree really fits the bill nicely. Because the tree is something that's alive, it's something that grew, it's something that will eventually wither and die. And this really fits the role of something that can then bestow this order, control these rules and enforce these rules on the world. Because these two are things that will grow, and will change, and will wither, and will die as well." End quote. Okay, like I mentioned, these 2 interviews are very recent, and they are for a game that isn't out yet, Elden Ring. But I would like you to pay attention to the phrases and terminology he uses, especially the parts about the established order and the desperately clinging to that established order, as we now go through the story of Dark Souls, from the beginning of Dark Souls 1 to the Ringed City DLC. Okay, Where to start? Well, to begin with, the original shape of humanity is hollows. Hollows are what humans look like before the advent of fire. It is the original and true shape of mankind.
Wrest the flame from its mantle, so that we hollows, in most honest shape of man, may have it for our own. Our Lord of Hollows, it shall be, who weareth the true face of mankind.
Drang Lake will fall, the fire will fade, and the souls of old will re-emerge. With dark unshackled, a curse will be upon us, and men will take their true shape. Dark will again be ours, and in our true shape, we can bury the false legends of yore.
Now what Vendrick said right here is very important. As the fire fades, the dark becomes unshackled, which means it's shackled to begin with. When it becomes unshackled, the curse of the undead comes upon the land. When dark becomes unshackled, men return to their true shape. These shackles are the reason that humans don't look like hollows.
Once, the Lord of Light banished dark and all that stemmed from humanity. And men assumed a fleeting form. These are the roots of our world.
The fleeting form that Aldia is talking about is the current way that humanity looks like. Gwyn shackled the dark, that is to say, he shackled humanity, and prevented them from taking their true shape. And he did this with rings. To the Pygmy Lords, Gwyn gave them authority and a grand city, but it was a ringed city, located at the world's edge. It is ringed so that he can encompass them, so that they and their humanity can be contained. The Ringed Knight armor reads, "The armor of early men was forged in the abyss, and betrays the smidgen of life. For this reason the gods cast a seal of fire upon such armor, and those who possess them." The Ringed Knight armor has what looks like a dark sign at its center. And this finally reveals what the dark sign is. It is a seal of fire, meant to shackle the dark, meant to contain the spread of humanity. And that's why the dark sigil from Uria's questline looks like a dark sign without the seal of fire. Humanity seeps from the dark sigil, now that it has been uncontained by the flame. The reason that the dark sign becomes visible, the reason that the curse reemerges, and the reason that men turn into hollows, is because as the fire fades, the seal of fire that contains the humanity in every human starts to weaken. The Age of Fire is the current order, the civilization that Gwyn built. He foresaw the coming end. He sacrificed himself to kindle the first flame and prolong the inevitable end. And he set things up so that humans would be guided to do the same. And that is the story of Dark Souls 1. It depicts the rise of Gwyn, the establishment of his order, and the first iteration of the fire-linking cycle that would bind humanity to the first flame forever. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, made it more clear what humanity's relationship to fire was. It isn't just this negative force that binds and restricts mankind. It is something that humanity is obsessed with, something that we can never get enough of. And these ideas of fire not being a whole negative were present even in Dark Souls 1. In the DesignWorks interview, Miyazaki and some of the staff members talk about the opening cutscene in Dark Souls 1. Specifically the part in which the Firekeeper gently grabs an ember. A great deal of effort went into making sure to depict the fire as something precious and valuable, but fragile and close to breaking. Once again, I must recommend that you go see my other video if you want more details as to why I think fire is civilization. But for the purposes of this video, whatever fire is or represents, it's enough to know that it's important to humanity. It's something worth preserving. We have good reason to continue linking the flame. And humans do continue to link the flame, all the way until Dark Souls 3. This is what Miyazaki had to say about Dark Souls 3 before its release. He is asked what an unkindled is and how it's different from a chosen undead from Dark Souls 1. This is his reply. I quote, "Dark Souls 3 can be defined as something born after the end, inheriting all things in the past. Dark Souls 1's protagonist is an undead, describing a story of passing on the flame. However, Dark Souls 3 depicts the undeads who didn't succeed in linking the fire and failed to become cinder. Instead, they burnt out. The unkindled are born out of their remaining ashes. Unkindled exist to inherit the past and put an end to the accumulated history. End quote. Dark Souls 3 is a story about the end. And like the other stories I've mentioned, it's about people obsessed with the preservation of the first flame. It's about what their efforts cost them and their eventual failure. In this dying world, the Lothric royal family was obsessed with creating a worthy heir to link the fire. Lothric was meant to be the hero of his age. He was born to be a champion, and as his throne depicts, the last hope of his line. But it was not to be. Lothric was born frail and sickly. Eventually he rejected his duty, choosing instead to let the fire fade. The king in his desperation went insane. Whatever he was trying to do with Ocelot and with the dragon magic he was researching didn't work. The linking of the fire was in danger, and when the link of fire is threatened, the bell tolls, unearthing the old Lords of Cinders from their graves. The Lords of Cinders are the champions of the past. They are people who once inherited the will of the First Lord, and their sacrifice perpetuated the First Flame into the future. But they too rejected their duty. And so finally the First Flame revives the Unkindled. The Unkindled are people that tried to link the First Flame at one point, but were found unworthy in some way, and failed to become cinders. But the First Flame is out of options. Their first, second, third, and fourth choice have all abandoned them. And so they turn to the Unkindled, people who the First Flame has already rejected in the past. Dark Souls 3 is depicting a world that is running out of ways to sustain itself. It's feeding on its own ashes. It's feeding on the embers of its past glories. And the result of that can be finally seen at the end of the Ringed City DLC. Have you ever wondered why? When your character is flung into the future, the far future, everything is buried in ash? It is for the same reason that you are called an Ashen One. Because ash is what remains when you burn something in a fire. What this is showing you is a world in which everything has been sacrificed to the preservation of the First Flame. And funnily enough, it's still going. You can see the sun in the distance. That's not a dark sign. Humans kept sacrificing until there was nothing left to burn. And that, I believe, is the point of the game. That things rot. That things decay. Not as a consequence of some bad guy, but simply because that's what things do. And that by resisting the course of nature, we end up destroying what we wanted to preserve. Dark Souls wants to depict that frustration, that tragedy, like a king at the end of his reign, desperately clinging to the power he once had. Like a country, trying to revive the glory of its past. Or even like a video game series, whose lore and accumulated history is about to make it stale. The game does not provide an answer, because there is no right answer. What it does do is pose a question. Do you link the fire? Do you preserve the existing order for just a little longer? Will you join the champions of the past? Will you inherit their will? Will you become a link in an unbroken chain that traces its roots all the way to the Lord of Sunlight? After all, you wouldn't want their sacrifices to be in vain. Perhaps in the next cycle, someone will come up with a more permanent solution. Perhaps just a little more sacrifice then. We can tolerate a little more decay. The correct solution could be right around the corner. Don't you think?